Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Randy Cook. Before we get into our interview today, we wanted to take just a moment to acknowledge all of our healthcare colleagues on the front lines of the COVID-19 battlefield and to express our deepest gratitude for your dedication and commitment to assure that everyone in need of your skill and expertise receive the attention and the care they need. Thank you so much for your devoted service during this crisis. And by the same token, we'd also like to give you, our audience, the opportunity to express your gratitude and to offer comments of support to our brave frontline caregivers. Whether it be a spouse, a sibling, a friend, or a neighbor, we all know someone who is serving in this way and are richly deserving of our acknowledgement. If you'd like to say thank you or give a shout out to someone for the work they're doing to keep us all safe and healthy, all you have to do is go to our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com and click on the Contact Us tab. Once you're there, just scroll to the bottom of the page and you'll see a big red record button. All you have to do then is click that button, record your message, and then hit submit. It's just that easy. Once we receive your messages, we'll compile the recordings and play them in upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for participating, and now here's today's interview.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host for the program. We'll get to today's interview in just a moment, but first I want to remind everyone that our podcast is made possible with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to empowering physicians to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. My guest today is Dr. Desmond Bell. Dr. Bell is a podiatrist who recognized very early in his career that proper management of chronic wounds, especially wounds on the lower extremities, is sadly lacking in the U.S., and he has been amazingly successful in the effort to improve on that, not only in the Jacksonville, Florida area where he's practiced for over 20 years, but also nationally and internationally as well. Dr. Bell got his undergraduate degree in psychology from Tulane University in New Orleans long before he was even considering a career in medicine. We'll hear the story of how he made that decision and also why he chose podiatry. We'll also hear how he recognized the need for improvement in the management of chronic wounds and how he has become a thought leader in wound care management and education. In recognition of his contributions to the advancement of chronic wound care, he was inducted into the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Glasgow. Dr. Bell is also a dedicated humanitarian, and we'll hear all about his creation of the Save a Leg, Save a Life Foundation. I'm so glad you could join us today, so now let's hear that interview. So I'm talking today with my good friend Desmond Bell down in the Jacksonville, Florida area. As we have heard in the introductory remarks, Dr. Bell is a podiatrist and has had a very successful practice in podiatry with a concentration in wound care, which we'll talk about. So, Dr. Desmond Bell, I'm going to make this absolutely informal. This will be a first-name basis interview. And I'll begin by saying welcome to Prescription for Success, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Cook, and I will take the liberty to call you Randy, as I, again, feel like we've been good friends for many years now through our mutual efforts, and it's really it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
You bet. Well, for me as well, I'm really looking forward to giving you an opportunity to tell your story, which is a good one. So let's talk about your very beginnings. I know that you did your undergraduate work in New Orleans at Tulane, and I'm wondering, with a BA in psychology, if podiatry was even in your head when you started to undergraduate school.
Oh, I didn't even know what a podiatrist was when I was in undergrad. I really had no idea that profession had so many aspects until probably 5 or 6 years after I graduated college. So I guess with that, let me just explain a little bit. From the time I was a little kid, really, I was interested in medicine, and I really hoped to be a doctor someday. And with that, I began working as a volunteer at a local hospital in northern New Jersey, where I grew up. And eventually I was hired. So from age 14, I've been in the medical field in a sense. And, at a young age, in some ways, I think maybe it had an initial negative impact on me, because I saw so many things that could almost be depressing to a kid at that age. When you're a teen, you should be having some fun and, playing and learning about the world, I guess. But I got some real important life lessons at an early age. And quite honestly, I think by the time I got to college, I was starting to have almost the first signs of burnout of medicine. And
really?
Yeah. So with my initial goals of wanting to be pre-med, entering college, and still working as an orderly then all through college years, I decided that it wasn't for me. And so I put it all on the back burner and pursued a degree in psych, of all things.
That's really interesting that would have had the impact on you, because you're so right. You see so much of what life is really all about, particularly in a hospital. And I can understand if you sort of already had that inborn tendency for empathic services, that it might have been a little hard on you. Am I hearing that right?
That's a great way to put it too, because I think in medicine, many of us do have that calling or that empathetic type personality. And yet there was this dichotomy. You're just seeing, in the course of giving, in a sense, you're giving so much of yourself, even at that early age, that it was having a negative effect, in a sense, too, on my overall psyche, maybe. I guess at that young age, seeing people in their end stages in many cases, and struggling, and seeing people not at their best, even when I'm saying not at their best, it's nights where I work the emergency room, and some of the sites that I saw there, or some, quite honestly, people dying. These were really kind of harsh realities, and as well as my first really introduction to wound care. That had some profound impact on me. But, I just remember going back to college after one of our breaks, and one of my friends said to me, it's almost like it takes you a few weeks to kind of get back to being yourself every year when you come back to school. And it's like, really? It's like, and I thought that was a really interesting observation, because for a friend to have some type of perception that maybe I was kind of in I don't want to say a dark place, but more a retrospective or quiet place. When all my friends going back to school, everybody's excited to see each other, start the semester and that type of thing. And like you mentioned, New Orleans is the place to really kind of cut loose. So
not a bad place to be a college kid.
No. You learn a lot of life lessons there for sure. But, I just think I look back on that and I say, yeah, this, the early introduction to medicine was not the conventional path. But I learned so much, looking back and say, you know what, maybe it wasn't not the conventional path for most, but for me, I think it made a lot of sense, and it's really had a overall much more important effect on me for the long term.
Yeah, clearly. And did you have any preconceived ideas about what you might do with that degree in psychology, or do you feel like you were still just searching at that time? What was your state of mind?
Well, I think I got into the whole psychology part of it because I was fascinated by human behavior and how people think. But I was sort of disillusioned, I guess, during the early course load of psychology, and just saying, well, a lot of this seems like common sense. Why are they wasting all this time doing studies on things that we already know? Well, you just come to realize that that's important, the research aspect of it. But at the same time, I saw that psychology was interesting and fascinating, but was not something I really wanted to do, for a profession. That's for sure. Ironically, though, I still use some of the things that I've learned in my personal and professional life for sure.
I bet you do. So once you finished your undergraduate degree, there was clearly a little bit of a gap before you went to podiatry school. So everybody wants to know by now, I'm sure, when did you come to that decision and how did you go about making the decision to go into that level of training?
Well, so after graduation, I worked for about 5 years. And my first job out of college was working in sales at Lipton Tea, of all places. So I was fortunate enough to have been hired by Lipton, and I would go to supermarkets and do merchandising and talking to the managers, et cetera. And believe it or not, there was something that I learned in my first week of sales training that I still carry with me in my medical career. And that really comes down to how to interview your patients and how to talk to them. And in a sense, sort of how to control the dialogue and get the important information when you are conducting an interview. And I'll tell you the little gem that I learned. It's like, never ask somebody how they're doing, because you may get a short answer or you may get a dissertation that never ends and you can't pull yourself out of it. So you've got to construct your line of questioning when you're dealing with patients to be more right to the point. So
I'm confident that rings true with every physician, nurse, anybody connected in medicine profoundly understands that, I'm sure. And it's interesting to me that you learned it by doing something that didn't have anything to do with medicine. That's great.
Exactly. It's just, again, it's human nature, but it's also people want to be heard. But from the medical side of things, you know how precious our time is, and you don't have time to be listening to about all the, the family dynamics or every other thing that's going on in someone's life. You have to get right to the point. So anyway, that first 5 years, I went from Lipton Tea, and then I actually got into a little bit of direct marketing for a while. But then my last job before I went back to school was Zimmer Orthopedic. And I was fascinated with orthopedics. I love sports. I thought maybe I'd go into orthopedics and really get into sports medicine. That was my goal.
And for folks, I just want to make sure that everybody sort of grasps the importance of where you are there. Zimmer is a maker of quite a number of different orthopedic devices, particularly joint implants, artificial hips, artificial knees, things of that nature. So you were beginning to see some of the things that went into the rescue and reconstruction of lower extremities, even though you were not specifically in a technically medical field of interest at that time.
That's a good assessment, Randy. What I was responsible for, besides, delivering the occasional hip and knee prosthesis, and I got training in that too. So I was in the OR, but I was responsible for delivering and selling some of the ancillary things. Zimmer Orthopedic, as you mentioned, is a really large company, and they're almost like, we used to call ourselves the Sears Roebuck of orthopedics. In fact, many of the companies that are out on the market were originally spinoffs of Zimmer. So it's this company that started in Warsaw, Indiana, of all places, but they have everything. And my specialty was arthroscopy systems. So arthroscopic surgery was really starting to have an impact, and it was emerging as a major part of orthopedics when I was at Zimmer. And again, my time in the OR and learning how to do knee scopes, we had models and I would practice in my kitchen. But I would be responsible for bringing the systems to orthopedic surgeons to trial. And I was treated as a peer in many cases, and I really enjoyed it. So ironically, the day that my boss was calling me into his office to tell me that he was giving me a raise, I told him, please don't tell me what you're going to give me, because I have to tell you, I decided I'm going to go back to school. And I made that commitment. And he said, I'm proud of you. It's something I wish I had done. And I enrolled at a small community college, not really a community college, really a state school up in northern New Jersey. And I did my pre-medical courses over the span of about 2 years. It was a real leap of faith. And I felt really uncomfortable at first walking onto a college campus, even though it had only been a few years since I was there. But now I'm in a business suit and going into the admissions office and finding out what it would take to enroll. And fortunately, I was welcomed by professors who had almost similar career paths, I came to find out. But they also—
That's really profound, Des. You were clearly making pretty good wage at that point and had the potential to make a lot of money if you continue to do exactly what you were doing, and yet
yes,
you made the decision to re-educate yourself. That really is profound. So go ahead.
Well, it was one of those things, Randy, and I appreciate you mentioning that, because it was almost like that little test that you can do. You kind of figure out what your purpose is or where you want to be. And at the time, I was not seeing anybody. I was not married or engaged or anything. But I just kind of did a little self-reflection. And I said, okay, do I want to be running around northern New Jersey delivering hips and knees for the rest of my life? Or is there something more I can contribute and something that will be more satisfying? So I figured, well, I don't have any commitments right now. Let me give it a shot. Let me go back to school. And if I make it, fantastic. And if not, well, at least I tried. And there'll be no shame in that. And so that's what I did. And it was actually a great experience. I went from, like you mentioned, Tulane, which is not a big university, but still about 10,000 people, to this small state school. And there were 6 pre-medical students in our program. And I got a great education from some really dedicated mentors. And mentoring is a key theme, I hope, in the rest of this interview. But it was those people who encouraged me to continue what I was doing made all the difference for me.
Well, it clearly was the right decision for you. I'm interested for a little bit more about the details of podiatry school. Did you find that fascinating and a lot of fun every day, or was it arduous, difficult? And did you have moments when you wondered if you had made the right decision? What were those 4 years like?
Wow. So great question. So before I entered podiatry school, let me take one quick little step back. I was fast tracking to do the medical program at Rutgers up in New Jersey. My pre-medical advisor had some contacts there, and he said, listen, we're going to, kind of push you to that program. And I was all excited about that. So even when you were doing these, improving your science background, you had not yet made the decision that it was going to be podiatry. Is that right? That's correct. My whole goal was to do orthopedics and sports medicine.
I see.
So as we're preparing to do the MCATs and get my letter of recommendation submitted, the week before the letter of recommendation was due to Rutgers, my pre-medical advisor, who was one of my bio professors as well, went out with quadruple bypass surgery. So now I don't have that letter from the department head. I'm going to miss the deadline. So this means potentially another year of not applying to school. So I just kind of, in this interim time where I was kind of contemplating all that, I started getting mail from the podiatry schools. And I started researching it, and I learned that, podiatrists can do foot and ankle surgery. They can do sports medicine, do a little primary care, pediatrics, whatever. It's like, maybe this makes some sense. And having been in that orthopedic arena, started looking at my age. It's like, well, do I want to be doing, crazy surgeries all night long, or do I want to have maybe a normal family life?
Like a day job.
So it just seemed on the surface like, well, maybe this is another option. So in the interim, I applied to the schools, and I was accepted to several of them and decided to go off to podiatry school down in Philadelphia. So I made that decision. It was kind of like that, or wait another year, potentially roll the dice, and do I want to, just kind of be inactive? And at the same time, I just want to tell you one last little bit, Randy. As I was doing my pre-medical requirements, I actually worked in a health club. I worked as a trainer, and I learned a lot there too. And I had a blast. I met so many great people. I enjoyed that camaraderie of life in a gym, and I'm friends with some of those people to this day. So this is over 30 years now. So it's like I say, you just never know what life is going to throw at you, and just you keep making the most as things are unfolding. So
sounds like you took the opportunity to get an education everywhere you were.
That's what, and hopefully some of the listeners will maybe recognize that in themselves. And everywhere you go, there's an opportunity to learn. And one of my little key points today, as we wrap up later on, I do want to just remember, there's no such thing as failure, and there's no such thing as missed opportunities. They're everywhere. Just seize that moment and just keep learning, and a lot of great things will happen. So a lot of it's attitude.
That's a great attitude.
It's
great attitude.
I think it's the best way to survive all this craziness sometimes too. You have to block so many of the negative things out.
And so let's go back to how was podiatry school? Did you find it challenging and again, sometimes making you wonder if you'd made the right decision, or was it the best time of your life, or something in between? What's the story?
It had its ups and downs. It was a pretty intense several years. I met some great people who I'm still friends with to this day. It was pretty intense, though. It almost got to the point where it's like, is this ever going to end? It was just nonstop with examinations and just so much intensive learning. And
not like hanging out in the gym, huh?
No. In fact, I remember the first week of school, one of our professors, Dr. Conway, said to us, he said, if you guys like working out and all that stuff, you can pretty much kiss it goodbye for a while. He had some other gems, but, there were times, and all of us felt discouraged at one time or another, but that's part of it, and it makes you better. It makes you stronger. You get through it, you survive, you advance, and then you look back and say, wow, I did that. Okay, I was able to learn this. And, you never quit. I remember even during my going back to school for my pre-medical stuff, which was also a pretty intensive 2 years, taking, all the organic chemistries and
I bet it was.
Things. Yeah. And then, working while I was doing that, I remember being frustrated one day, and my dad grew up in Northern Ireland of all places, and came to the US when he was 16. And he said to me, don't get too discouraged. He said, look, all I'm going to tell you is just be persistent. He said, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. He said, but you kids over here have so much opportunity that you don't realize. He said, if I had stayed in Ireland, I had pretty much 3 options. He said, I could have been a ditch digger, a priest, or live off the dole and be an alcoholic. He said, he goes, I wasn't the smartest guy. He goes, but I went, my dad, came to the U.S. and he worked his way up from age of 16. He worked in a bank and went to night school, was in the National Guard, and just really was such a role model. But I still remember that conversation like it was yesterday. It's like, yep, really, there's nothing to lose. Just keep plugging and just let the chips fall.
Sounds like he was somebody that understood that you can either be controlled by your circumstances or control your circumstances. And it sounds to me like you learned a lot from that.
Absolutely. That is so true. One of my other little points for today along those lines is, each day, just look in the mirror. It's such a common trap, I think, that people fall into, is when maybe things don't go their way and they want to blame others or blame circumstances or politicians or professors or whoever it is. Ultimately, our fate's in our hand. You have to look in the mirror every day and be accountable for yourself and just be in the moment. Don't, you can't undo what's already passed either. So you just make the most of that moment and be there. And just like we talked about earlier, just try and extract as much as you can from each situation, learn from it, and just become better in the process.
Very well said. And clearly, podiatry school went very well for you. And tell us a little bit about your postgraduate training and how you came to finish off your education. I noticed that you did some specific podiatric surgery training as well, and I'm wondering if it seems obvious to me that you thought that you were going to spend a lot of your time in the operating room, but I'd like to know what went into that decision making and what ultimately became of it.
Yes, well, I did my first year of postgraduate training at the Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Philadelphia. And that year was such an eye-opener.
That was an eye-opener.
It really was. I didn't know what I was going to expect. I just felt, well, going into the VA, I'm probably going to see all sorts of things, and it did not disappoint. But it made me the person that I am today in many regards and put me on the career path that I have followed since then. Obviously, VAs have a special group of patients that we tend to, and you can never do enough for these men and women. But the people that I encountered were tremendous. I also learned very quickly that there was a need for my services as part of the medical team. So every morning at the VA, we would make rounds with the other doctors who were staff doctors that were all residents from University of Pennsylvania and from Hahnemann and the Medical College of Pennsylvania. What I learned pretty quickly is that every time it came to a wound on the lower extremity, whether it was a diabetic foot ulcer or a venous leg ulcer or some other affliction of the leg or foot, they would be turning to me for help. And I was kind of floored by this because I figured, wow, these guys are the best and brightest, and they don't have a clue what to do. It's like, I really need to immerse myself in this, and I really need to get up to speed. And I fortunately had a residency director who encouraged me to really, take this on. And I remember still to this day, there was a wound care conference that was being held right across the street from where we were. One of our colleagues, Sharon Baranowski, and several others were the people who were involved in this, and I was allowed to go. And I just took notes all day long. And I brought some of the ideas back to the VA, and I asked my residency director, Ann Sinoga, I said, Ann, is it okay if I try some of these things on our patients? Because Randy, in reviewing charts of some of our patients, I realized that they were doing the same thing over and over again, and nothing was changing. So one particular patient I remember was a venous leg ulcer. Kindest man, had a venous ulcer on his leg for 8 years. And I'm going through the charts and I'm seeing all they're doing is putting betadine gauze on this guy's leg year after year. 8 years and nothing got better. So can I at least try something else? And she said, go ahead, go for it. And,
it's interesting that you picked up on that so early, because in those years, that was about all there was to chronic wound care.
Yeah, it's so true. We didn't have things even like negative pressure or some of the endovascular procedures that we can do to restore blood flow to the lower extremities nowadays. But with those limited resources, come to find out, we still had things that were not being utilized. So I was given the blessing to go ahead and start trying to improve things. And I was really pleased that by the end of my residency, that gentleman in particular was essentially healed up. And so from that, again, it opened my eyes, and I saw the importance of the role of a podiatrist within the team of a community, and the importance of limb preservation. We had, and you can ride around the country and pull up to any VA medical center, and I will bet you will find vets outside in wheelchairs, missing legs, smoking cigarettes. And I just was so impacted by this and wanted to do better that I just took this forward. My next year after the VA was more of a surgical training year, and this is around the same time that wound care centers started to emerge. And the hospital that I trained at in my surgical year actually had a wound care center. I quickly learned that the docs who were running that didn't really have much in the way of experience. And I still remember to this day, the two co-directors separately and unbeknownst to each other came to me and whispered in my ear and said, "Hey, I understand that you're pretty good at wound care. Can you teach me some things?" And I'm just laughing because it's like, wow, there really is, besides the obvious, there's a real lack of education or experience in wound care and limb preservation. And I can really have an impact. And most importantly, I enjoyed it. There's so much satisfaction in helping somebody get their life back, or to, get out of a situation where, they're having pain and some suffering, and to see visual, physical improvement week after week is really gratifying.
That's very perceptive of you, and really speaks to your ability to recognize a need and move directly to it, because you're so correct. At that particular time in the development of medical science, the understanding of chronic wounds was just remarkably absent. And in my own introductory episode to this podcast, I talked about how, I was 30 years into a surgical career, and somebody offered me an opportunity to head up a wound center. And I thought, sure, I know everything I need to know. And that was just the beginning of my education, and as I say, I had 30 years behind me at that point, and yet you figured this out at a very early point in your career. So congratulations on that.
Well, thanks for that. And, Randy, your situation is, really still quite common too. You've got physicians who have been out there practicing whatever area of medicine they've been in, and then they find themselves in wound care, and they realize pretty quickly that managing of chronic wounds is maybe not the same as managing acute wounds, for one, but also that the dynamics in managing chronic wounds, it's really fascinating. These are really complicated patients for the most part. And if you really kind of embrace this, there's challenges every day, and it really challenges you as a provider too. But it's so rewarding. And, think about it too. We are the fortunate ones. We get to know our patients. It's not the typical area of medicine where maybe you see your patient once or twice a year, or even less frequently than that. Or if you're a surgeon, you're in the OR and you may not have much more than a little post-op follow-up here and there, and then done. But we get to know our patients, and we get to follow their trends. We get to see them, even if they have recurrence of their issues, we're there for them. So it's really a great area of medicine for those of your listeners who may be interested in really exploring wound care and limb preservation.
It really is, and I hope that if nothing else, this program will cause some people to think about that. And along those lines, I'm going to move you along a little bit now. You clearly, even when you were finishing your residency training, had an idea about where you would like to concentrate your interest. And when you went into practice, you relocated to Jacksonville, to the Jacksonville area. Was that, how did you find that situation? How did you decide to go to Jacksonville?
I did some research, but most importantly, had an aunt and an uncle that relocated to St. Augustine years before. And my parents actually retired down here. And the first time I came down for a visit, I just fell in love with the area. And having gone to Tulane and experienced life in the South, I just love, the Southern way in many respects. And the weather was great. It just made so much sense. So I figured, well, I can stay in the Northeast. I had offers to remain up there, but figured, I went back to school to have the opportunity to kind of choose my own career path and fate. So came down to Jacksonville, and probably within a year, initially I ended up working for somebody for a few months, but then I was able to start my own practice, which within, again, another year evolved into a freestanding wound center because there was nothing in the area. And that's kind of how it started, with a little 600 square foot office that had a couple of treatment chairs, but just by letting people know what I do and what I really enjoyed doing, which was wound care, people started to come, and the rest, kind of like they say, is history. Haven't looked back.
So in the late 90s, being a person who had an interest in chronic wounds, I bet you didn't have any problem at all attracting a lot of attention and finding that you had plenty of patients to look after.
That's exactly what happened. Jacksonville was a growing area, and geographically it's pretty large. But I also found that a lot of my colleagues from the podiatry side of things didn't really want to be managing chronic wounds. And understand, wounds in a typical physician's office, let alone a podiatrist's office, are really an unknown factor. Every time you unwrap that dressing, you don't know what you're going to find. But again, these are really generally some of the sickest of the sick in terms of their medical underlying issues. So if you've got somebody coming in who has got maybe a callus or a bunion or something, and they're worried about making a tea time, or, they just have this little minor inconvenience, and yet in the same waiting room, you've got somebody with a limb-threatening wound, there's a really bad mix. So I decided to really stop seeing general podiatry patients after several years and just focus solely on wounds. And with that, some of my colleagues caught wind of this and communicated with me, and they would just start sending me their patients with wounds. And if somebody came in with heel pain, I just send them off to my colleagues. So that's kind of how I built my little practice, and it evolved. And eventually I started, doing hospital consults and becoming an active staff member at several hospitals in the area. Got to know other specialists, internists, and interventional cardiologists in particular, and really ramped it up even more from there.
So tell us a little bit about how you put all that together. And there will be quite a number of people who hear our podcast that probably don't understand how difficult it is to put together the team that is required to really effectively do chronic wound care. Because as you say, these chronic wounds are merely a symptom, and there are always at least one or two, and sometimes a multitude of factors that are part of the reason why the wounds persist. So you need a lot of specialists around you. How did you put that organizational aspect of your practice together?
That's a great question. And, again, we'll take a step back. My original office was 600 square feet, then expanded it to 900. And this was in Jacksonville Beach. So not in the downtown area. What started happening is, of all people, of all organizations, Blue Cross Blue Shield caught wind of what we were doing. And they saw the results. And so they were starting to refer patients. So before long, I couldn't just manage patients who were living in the beaches area. So had an office built. There were some condos that were being built. And so I designed a freestanding wound center, in a sense, to accommodate the geographic location where patients were coming from and to better physically manage what was happening. So with that, moving my office from the beaches to town, the south side of Jacksonville, put me in closer proximity to three of the hospitals that I used to go to. So again, when I mentioned earlier, I said a phrase, said just kind of being there, just physically having a presence. getting to know people, interacting with the various specialists, and not being afraid to take on some of the complicated cases and just really, stepping up. That's how you do it. And eventually people start to look to you. They know that you are willing to, help. You can help bail them out if they've got a complicated case. So, you mentioned some of the specialties. I work very, very closely with infectious disease specialists over the years, really almost from the get-go. Some of the internists who then became hospitalists, and other specialists, including vascular surgeons, interventional cardiologists, the interventional radiologists, to name a few. So it's something that kind of happens gradually, organically in a sense, but again, just by sharing information, being able to, and being willing to help each other out. That's really the secret. You can't function in your own world. You cannot, again, with this patient population, you cannot sit and hope that you can manage them by yourself. They require too many things. Nephrologists are another group that I work very closely with in all this. You look at it, the typical underlying medical conditions of someone with diabetes. Automatically, they've got 5 or 6 things that are going to warrant communication with other specialists. So this is how you do it. There's really no trick to it. You just have to be available and show up and do your job.
I have to say, when I look at what you've done down in the First Coast area, it is truly remarkable in contrast to what you typically see in medical care as it is delivered in the U.S. today, because it is the various practices, and particularly in most metropolitan areas, live in such insulated silos. And what you did by, first of all, understanding your needs as a wound care provider, and secondly, being willing to search out the additional providers that are needed to be a part of that team, you created an interspecialty referral network that I think is really relatively rare, and maybe not relatively, maybe just profoundly rare in the U.S. because of the way that we do things. And what a credit to you that you were able to pull that off in the current environment of medical economics. Did you ever feel like you were beating your head against the wall, or did it seem like it came fairly easy to you?
Well, thank you for those kind words, Randy. I'd say both. I just put my head down and just get to work. And I just got so much enjoyment from working with my patients and getting to know them, that would be my motivating factor more than anything. Just, helping those people who are in need. And I just let the chips fall from there. And like I said, everything else kind of evolved. There's one area, though, in particular that we didn't really talk about as far as specialists in developing a network, but that's the home health industry. A lot of our patients need home health assistance. And I started to recognize that there were some issues between the communication and the knowledge base with the physicians, primarily, who were managing wounds of homebound patients or patients who were ready for discharge from the hospital. So there was a real disconnect between the home health nurses and staffing and the persons writing the orders. So what started to happen is I started to get referrals and started to refer patients to various home health agencies. And again, I mentioned a disconnect. Here's an example. Patients in the hospital, they have a chronic wound. Whoever has been managing the wound writes for discharge orders and say, wound care, home health. And that's pretty much the orders that they would get. So now the burden falls on the home health agency. Who's minding the store? Who's managing this patient? Well, that doctor who was in the hospital, or even the primary doc from the community, is not really going to look at that wound anytime soon. So now you've got the management of the wound falling into the lap of the nurses, who often are the de facto wound care nurse of the agency, is the one who happens to have been there the longest. So this is what we saw back then. So what we started seeing coming into my practice were patients who were receiving home health. The orders were all over the place, but there were some basic fundamental things that were not being addressed properly, even how to put a bandage on properly, how to put a compression wrap on somebody, even how to do a vascular assessment with a Doppler as an example. So really from this, we started to educate the home health agency nurses. So I would invite nurses who were doing the wound care into my clinic and just let them come in and observe, and I teach them. And that way,
I bet that made them so happy.
And I'd say in many cases that was the case, but also it's empowering to them, but you're also mentoring. And again, mentoring being one of our themes today, it's so important to mentor. If you've got some knowledge, I think it's part of your obligation as a professional, as a medical professional, to share that with others, because everybody wins, everybody benefits, whether it's your patients, whether it's you, whether the other person. That's how it should be. That, at least in my world. So
that's actually built into the Hippocratic Oath, as a matter of fact.
That is correct.
You pass on your knowledge. Yeah.
That is correct. And everybody should review that once in a while, just to, if you're having a rough day, just take a little step back and remind yourself of why you're doing this and what's the important part of all this. So, just from doing that, we started to, educate locally. And from this concept came an idea of educating home health nurses. And we started a little group, a little lunch and learn group, where I would start to, basically teach the agency reps, the agency directors of nursing and nurses little tips and tricks or pearls about wound care. And again, wound care at this point is completely intimidating to a lot of people. Just at this time frame, like you say, in the late 90s, early 2000s, we had so many new products coming to the market in wound care, and there was more confusion than ever. And so what we were noticing is that despite all the technological breakthroughs, people were going back and still using the old methods of managing wounds. So that, okay, we've got to start doing better. We've got to start raising the bar here in Jacksonville. And I'm tired of putting out fires. We need more people involved so we can, before things turn into a disaster in a sense. So we started doing little lunch and learns, and it grew. It went from what we called the home health consortium to the wound care consortium of Jacksonville. And then one night I was preparing a lecture for a conference, and out of like a lightning bolt, it hit me. I scribbled on a napkin, "Save a leg, save a life." And I wrote it down, got to do something with this. I'm not quite sure. Well, after a while, we started calling our little group the Save a Leg, Save a Life
Outstanding. You have skillfully brought the conversation exactly where I wanted to go, and that is what I suspect is one of the things that you're most proud of in your professional life, and that is save a leg, save a life. So tell us more.
Yeah, well, so Save a Leg, Save a Life, the name kind of speaks to it. And again, seeing so many things that were preventable and unnecessary just made me say, well, what do I do here? Do you choose to ignore the situation, or do we start to recognize it and start trying to improve things? And that's the whole idea of mentoring in a sense, and bringing better wound care to Jacksonville. So this little group that started with maybe 15 people, probably within a year or so turned into over 100 people. And it wasn't just nurses, but it became physicians, physical therapists. And we even had people from industry part of this, because they're all part of this too. We're all working towards the same goals. So within a couple of years, we started noticing that our amputation rates started going down in Jacksonville. We actually tracked this and said, wow, we're really onto something. So after probably about 2 years or 3 years into this, one of the reps from an endovascular company. So if your listeners are not sure what endovascular refers to, there are technologies that cardiologists have used for years, or interventional radiologists, where they put, let's say, stents into cardiac vessels or do angioplasties to open up blockages in cardiac vessels. We saw this breakthrough of taking that skill set and taking it beyond the cardiac vessels and going down into the lower extremities. And in doing so, we could start to restore blood flow to compromised limbs that otherwise likely would have had to go for an amputation. We gave people a new lease. So anyway, not to digress, one of the reps from one of the companies said, you guys are really doing something special. It's like, well, we're just doing what we know needs to be done. He said, no, we need to start bringing this to other cities. It's like, well, what do we do? Because honestly, I had no clue. There was no blueprint for any of this. There was no desire to create a nonprofit organization, or I had no clue. I mean, I'm already busy enough with my day job and trying to live my life. But again, kind of figured, well, maybe we're onto something. Maybe we need to start, ramp this sharing of ideas and education on a bigger scale. And that's what we did. And before long, within several years, we had started to really grow this thing. And, the sky's the limit with it right now.
And you actually have, there are multiple chapters of SalSal, are there not?
Well, Randy, when we started the organization, we actually had chapters, but as things have evolved, and just to let everybody know, we are a nonprofit organization now, so we did go through all that. But I realized that the chapters model of delivering this message and our mission was actually holding us back. So for the time being, we have not done chapters, but what we are doing is more of a philanthropic effort now, in addition to the educational aspect. So we're still moving along, but our real mission in all this is to start to get the message of unnecessary amputation to the general population who has no idea of all the bad things that are associated with this. So instead of doing chapters, what we've decided to do is kind of scale it back, have a website, use social media. Social media is a very powerful tool if used properly. And I think we're accomplishing more now through those two venues than getting together and periodically having a dinner educational meeting, even though there's a time and a place for that. Right now, we're doing some other things, which we'll talk about.
That's very interesting that, again, you perceived something early on in the process, and that is that because our methods of communications have changed and social media is powerful, there is an opportunity to spread the word much more effectively.
Absolutely. So back to the name of our organization, Save a Leg, Save a Life. It speaks to several things. Number one, trying to reduce unnecessary amputation, and we'll get into why that's so important. But it's also about connecting the dots between some pretty terrible things as well. So one of the things that is associated with amputation in many, many cases is something called peripheral arterial disease. Now, everybody knows what coronary disease is, or atherosclerosis, where you get calcification of cardiac vessels can lead to heart attack. But it can also lead to things such as stroke, kidney disease, all these bad things. So when you've got this calcification going on of arteries in the lower extremities, we refer to this as peripheral arterial disease. What we're trying to do is let people know that not only is amputation often unnecessary and preventable, but we want people to be looking too. So if podiatrists are out there, or vascular surgeons, looking, or primary care physicians, I should say, looking at the lower extremities and assessing for circulation down there, you may not only reduce the likelihood of an amputation, but you may prevent a heart attack or a stroke as well. So again, it's working in the team approach. In other words, I see a patient with diminished circulation to their feet because there's a blockage higher up. I make a referral either to a vascular surgeon or a cardiologist. They do their workup. You'd be amazed at how many times we found patients who had far more serious things. So again, it's connecting those dots. So where we've used social media, and I don't mean to be too long-winded, but I'll give you an example. Most people do not know the 5-year mortality rates associated with all the things that we've just mentioned. peripheral disease, non-healing wounds of the lower extremity in particular, compared to many forms of cancer. So 5-year mortality rates, just as a quick overview, for somebody with peripheral arterial disease, it's roughly 64%. A woman or a patient with breast cancer, doesn't have to be a woman, has about a 12-year 5-year mortality rate. Prostate cancer is down to about 6%. A non-healing diabetic foot ulcer has about a 5-year mortality rate of almost 50%. So we've got so many millions of people now who are afflicted with diabetes, and it keeps going up. And we've got all these bad things that are associated with it. Yet people know the pink ribbon. They know what breast cancer is about. In the grand scheme of things, the only thing that's really worse is lung cancer or pancreatic cancer when it comes to some of these lower extremity wounds and peripheral arterial disease. So what we've done is we created something, we call it the White Sock Campaign. The idea was to have a fun way of starting to drive this message to the public. So most people do not know when peripheral arterial disease awareness month is. Most people don't even know what PAD is. Most people know what the pink ribbon stands for, and most people know what breast cancer awareness month is in October. So we came up with this idea. Let's start educating and getting the word out to the public by using social media. We came up with an idea called the White Sock Campaign, and we have a ribbon too, which we'll get into. The whole idea of using the White Sock Campaign was to have social media drive this message, not just locally, but internationally and globally. So what we started doing is in the month of September, which is PAD Awareness Month, have people take pictures wearing one white sock and use those photos and put them on social media and see what happens. And we use the various hashtags like hashtag PAD, hashtag White Sock Campaign. And it's shocking to see what's happening now. We literally are getting people from all over the world in the month of September and during several other months too, putting these photos out there and helping us spread the word. So this is just part of our little mission.
Well, Des, I know that I'm a little bit prejudiced, but I think that you may have, I think you almost certainly have landed on the thing that is going to make the biggest difference in the most overlooked area of medical care. And that is very simply that people get so focused on the sore that they start to overlook all of the physiologic stressors that are behind it, and the very reality that you have discussed so eloquently, and that is that there is always something very serious that needs to be fixed, and if it's not, these people are going to have a significantly shortened lifespan. So I'm so impressed with what you've done, and I know that you're proud of what you've done, and I suspect that this idea that you started is going to save a tremendous number of lives, or certainly lengthen a significant number of lives, and you really are to be congratulated for putting this all together. I know you're going to tell me that there were lots of people behind it, but let's face it, you're the guy that was driving the train, and you really should be congratulated.
Well, thank you for, again, the kind words, Randy. All I can tell you is that, we mentioned cancer, and being in clinic day in and day out and seeing the physical, the emotional roller coaster that our patients go on and go through, as well as their family members, the parallel with cancer is for real. And you just see the quality of life and the impact, the negative impact that chronic wounds and peripheral disease have on our patients. And we just want to give them a better quality of life. And, so much of this is preventable and treatable if we recognize it earlier. And to your point, too, one of the things that's the most disturbing is that we've had this explosion in diabetes, for one. I mean, when back in my days at the VA, so that was probably around 1995, 96, we had about 16 million people with diabetes in our country. We're now over 30 million, and there's no end in sight. And when you look at the pre-diabetics that are factored into this, the CDC is thinking that we may be actually closer to about 100 million people in our country who have some either form of this, whether it's pending or it's actually full blown. So I think that, we've got to do better. And how do you do it? Again, you start driving this awareness, educating, and then helping individuals too who are struggling. That's the other part of, what we're trying to do. We've actually created a whole philanthropic aspect of the organization because, again, when you see what patients are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, many of them don't have good insurance, and they don't have even something as simple as proper diabetic shoes. So part of our organization is we're trying to get people around the country who are healthcare providers, who are working in particular in wound care clinics, to look for those patients who are struggling. And if they are, we have the resources now where we can help patients. We can get them some shoes or socks or inserts or medical supplies or things that they may need. And that's part of what we're trying to do. And that's a further way to raise the bar and educate even more.
Well, again, you're doing a great job, and congratulations on your success. And before we get out of here, I want to move on a little bit and talk about what's next for you. I know that you're entering another chapter of your life, closing down your patient care practice. But rumors on the street that you're going to be moving into the world of personal coaching. Is that right?
That is correct. And, it was a difficult decision initially. The hardest part of it is that, again, I care very much for my patients and the relationships I've had with other medical professionals over the years, the nurses, the doctors. But again, the patients, you really do care for them very much, and with very few exceptions. So it's time, though. It's time to continue to educate and mentor on a grander scale. You start to realize, or I started to look at my life and where I'm at. And even with SalSal, or the Save a Leg, Save a Life Foundation, I said, I can only help so many people within the confines of my office each day. But if we have a worthwhile message and a way to reach more people in a positive way, whether it's better access to care, whether it's better education, then you've got to look at other venues to do that. And so the coaching part of this just makes so much sense. I see fellow providers struggling. Medicine is not what it was 15 years ago or 20 years ago. Certainly not even 5 years ago. It's constantly in a state of flux. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of good people almost beaten down by what's happened. I felt it myself. I love spending time with my patients and doing the practice of medicine. Well, I find myself doing 2 to 3 times the amount of work doing administrative work. And there's got to be an end to this at some point. Well, fortunately, in the spirit of giving and mentoring, let me take a couple quick steps back and tell you some of the other things that have happened besides the coaching. One of the other things that I'm doing, obviously, is the foundation work and making sure that continues to progress. But because I opened my practice or office to somebody and shared information 10 years ago, it's now turned into something big. 10 years ago, I was introduced to a chemical engineer who happened to be the inventor of liquid Tide detergent back in the day at Procter & Gamble. And his background, though, was also wastewater purification and purifying water and bacteria and biofilms. And I was introduced to this gentleman. His name is Chip Bettel. Chip was asked if he could spend time in my office, in my clinic, and if I would teach him about wounds. It's like, of course, come on in. It's like, whether it's a nurse, whether it's a student, everybody's welcome in my world. So we would just start to collaborate, and one thing led to another. And before you know it, after several months, he'd start showing up with prototypes of wound products, dressings. It's like, what is this? He goes, no, I've got some ideas here. So I didn't really think anything of it, but the ideas that he was presenting made a lot of sense. We're looking at ways to disrupt biofilm, which is one of the major problems in chronic wounds, why chronic wounds do not heal. So he found a way to sort of disrupt some of the biofilm adhesion that goes on below the surface of wounds or in the wounds themselves. And it was all based on omega-3 fatty acids from fish oil. It's like, okay. So one thing led to another. I never really thought anything was going to happen with this. Well, about 4 years ago, I got a call from him and said, I don't know if you're interested in being part of this, but we're forming a company. It's like, well, I don't have any money to invest in this. He said, no, we want you to be part of this. It's like, okay. So I listened, and here we are 10 years later. I'm part of a company now. I'm going to be serving as the chief medical officer for a company called Omeza. It's spelled Omeza, as in omega-3 fatty acids, and amazing. And the leadership that has come together with this group is just, it's kind of surreal to me. And I tell people, I said, I get to be the dumbest guy in the room now because I'm learning so much about the business of medicine. And I'm involved now in developing the clinical trials for the product. And so that's a whole new thing. So, I guess why I'm bringing this up, Randy, it's just if you open yourself up to other people and you're not afraid to share, you never know what's going to happen. Don't expect anything, but, the rewards are usually that you're going to meet some great people along the way, whether it's your patients, whether it's people like Chip, who I met, whether it's people like yourself, who I've gotten to know over the years as a colleague who shares similar passion and interest in trying to make the world a little bit better. You just never know what's going to happen, and there's no failures. Anytime you have a little setback, it's just a life lesson that's coming at you. You can just gain so much, and you never know who you're going to be helping in the process. So, whether it's coaching, whether it's in the business world, whether it's in medicine, it all ties together, and just enjoy the ride. We're all passing through here. We should all be helping each other out in the process. And that's really, that's kind of my personal philosophy on this.
Well, Des, you got a great story, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share it with us today. I'm sure our audience is going to enjoy that. And with that, what I'm going to do is bring you to a point to where you can maybe give us a little summary of what we've already heard, and that is when we get to hear your prescription for success. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and I will sit quietly while Dr. Desmond Bell gives us his personal prescription for success.
All right. Well, I put a little thought into this, Randy, as I'm sure you can imagine. But, talking about, let's say, what would my older self say to my younger self, which I think is a great place to start. And number one, and this is relevant for everybody who's listening, just always believe in yourself. Don't worry too much about what other people think or what they're doing. As long as you are following your heart and, using your skill set, you'll be fine. I think figuring out your purpose is always the challenge. But once you get there, then don't look back. And again, don't worry about what's happened yesterday. You can't control that. And you can't control the future either. So just please be in the moment. Enjoy. Again, just soak it all in. Get through little blocks of each day and just stay focused. Again, there's no failures. The friends you make along the way are the greatest gift, in my opinion. So I kind of like to leave and kind of summarize this by a quote that I found literally walking around outside of San Diego one day. It was a little plaque on the sidewalk of all places. But it was a quote from Winston Churchill. And he said, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." And, it's just so much more fun to give gifts than to receive them. And I think that's just the simple little thing that we can all take from this. And, if anybody wants to learn more about our organization, Save a Leg, Save a Life, again, they can go to social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram. But our website is www.thesalsal.org. That's THESALSAL.org. And also, if they're interested in what we're doing with Omeza. That's www.omeza.com. It's also a fascinating story. So, the more you learn about technology and other things, again, we're always learning, and you've got to keep that thirst for knowledge and keep learning at every possible opportunity. So I want to thank you, Randy, for giving me this time to talk with you today. As a friend, as a colleague, as somebody I look forward to working with again a lot more closely in the near future, and looking forward to helping our colleagues and others.
Well, Des, it's been a great pleasure to chat with you today. I'm always fascinated. It seems like every time I have a conversation with you, I always learn something else, and I learned a great deal today. It's really been fascinating hearing about all the details. So thanks again for spending the time with us and for sharing your contact information with us. We are excited that you're going to be coming on board with MD Coaches, and I will look forward to continuing to work with you in the future. And thanks once again very much for taking the time to be here.
You're welcome, Randy, and it's my honor. And again, I thank the listeners who hung in there and listened to me blather on for a while, but it's been great fun.
All right, Des, thanks a lot. Be seeing you soon.
Thank you, Randy.
So that will wrap up another episode of Prescription for Success. But before we go, I want to invite you to visit our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com, where you can become a subscriber. And we'd also like for you to be a part of the podcast. Just visit the website, click on the Contact Us button on the top of the home page, then scroll to the bottom and click on the big red Record button. And finally, just go ahead and read us your own personal prescription for success. If you stumble, like I do occasionally, just start over, and we'll edit to make you sound great. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.